As Australasia mourns John Clarke, his family and friends are attempting to come to grips with the unexpected death of a much-loved man who appeared to be in very good health. John Clarke and Sam Neill had a friendship that spanned almost half a century. They would go on to work together and to be mates in that way that makes you richer and better. John Clarke was brilliant, Sam Neill says. Clever, funny, a great writer, a fantastic actor, and a very fine man. He was also the best kind of friend, dating all the way back to Victoria University.
I remember the first thing I ever saw him do was he came on stage. You can get a recording of it, the flea race. He'd got that New Zealand racing commentary right down. He had a sort of table in front of him, and the whole sketch, you can hear it on YouTube, is a New Zealand flea handicap, and the narrator, he himself, has obviously got a few quid on Daggy Boy, and as the race goes on, and Daggy Boy keeps getting passed by different fleas, this big finger would come down and eliminate the opposition. Yeah, he was, but he just had to walk on stage and people would laugh. He didn't even have to do anything. There was something innately funny about him. But on top of that, he was such a good actor.
What did you talk about when you were together in Melbourne? What would you talk about, you boys?
Well, I think sort of everything amused John. He was particularly amused by politics. He was very curious about many, many things. I spoke to John's wife this morning, and she said, I'm just looking at the bed beside me and all these books that he's reading about 6 books simultaneously on these incredibly different, diverse subjects. It's a sort of a very inquisitive mind, and once he got interested in something, he would pursue that thing to the dogged end. He knew more about New Zealand military history than most military historians, for instance. But it was politics that amused him more than anything else. It wasn't to say he wasn't angry. He got angry. He was privately very angry about a lot of things. For instance, I would say the sort of, the way we're being sold trickle-down economics again, that if you give tax cuts to business, this is going to benefit the workers who get better wages and all this sort of. I mean, we've been sold this rubbish for 30 years, and we know it's absolute bollocks. That just means there's a greater gulf between the rich and the poor. And these things made him very angry. But he had a very graceful way in his political satire, which I think was his greatest achievement.
Yeah.
He was on every week on Australian television for 30-plus years, doing that weekly spot. And if you look at that great cache of work on YouTube, Clarke and Dorr, it's incredible work. But he had a way of poking the borax into politicians, and he had a wonderful sort of bullshit detector. But he had a way of doing it in such a way that it wouldn't take offence. But he was very good at explaining what was going on. Very gifted man.
Very gifted.
But you're right about the conversation. He was one of those people with that rare gift that because he was so funny, but he also made you funny, and you found yourself being funnier in his company. That was one of the things I really loved about him. He brought the best out of you.
We've lost someone really special, haven't we? And we've lost him, Australia's lost him, and I feel like at the moment the world needs people capable of exposing absurdity and cant, but doing so in a way that doesn't create even more enmity. It was such a great skill, wasn't it?
Yes, I think we've both, I think Australia and New Zealand lost someone very particular and special. He was, it is, people have asked me, why did John never come back to New Zealand? Because he loved New Zealand so much. He was so part of the soil here. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I had to explain this morning. That's why I explained it to you. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he left in 1975, and I remember, no, perhaps it was 77.
But I remember
that time. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think there's several reasons for this. One was I think the tall poppy thing was beginning to get to him. That's not an unusual thing. The second thing was that it's hard to remember now, but this character had sort of become bigger than anything. It was like he'd become the Beatles or something. He couldn't walk into a pub and have a drink without being assaulted or everyone had their arms around him. He was like everybody's mate, and I think that had become unendurable. His privacy had completely evaporated. But also, that was the Muldoon era, and there was something rather bleak and unpleasant about New Zealand at that point. And I think that was another reason why he felt he had to leave, and he never came back. And I don't think it was because he didn't want to, but John didn't like to fly. He'd had a very bad experience in a plane coming back from his OE, and in the plane he was landing in India or something, and one of the wheels wouldn't come out, and then it was a sort of near-death experience, and that put him off flying in a big way. And he actually went and got treatment for it, and he said, "Oh yeah, no, it's no problem flying," but he still didn't fly. So I think it was just difficult to come back to New Zealand. But also, I suspect that because he was such, he left Fred Dagg behind in New Zealand, and I think he probably felt that he was always going to be Fred Dagg in New Zealand. I don't know. I'm only speculating because he was very good at deflecting these things.
We've lost him. 2 countries have lost him, but you have lost a mate, and you were magic together. And I know you and I have talked about this before, and I just want to glance over it as an homage, and I am in awe of the brilliance of you two in Death in Brunswick. And you made a company together, and I think Perfect Strangers was a Hunterway film, wasn't it? And you have lost to someone special, Sam, and the people closest to him must be feeling a very particular kind of grief because he looks so well.
Well, he was always a very fit man. So it's very surprising. But yes, I do feel a very big loss today. But that's not just me. He had a wonderful gift for friendship. He had many, many friends. The person, of course, he was closest to, and they'd been married since 1973, was his delightful wife, Helen. And I know of no closer or marriage than that. They were very, very interdependent. He absolutely adored her and his lovely girls. So, they're off too.
Sam Neill talking about his wonderful friend and a very fine man, John Clarke.